Okay, good morning. We're gonna begin by giving appreciation to Mayor Cohen, who has sponsored today's shiur and breakfast in honor of his mother's yahrzeit. Glekel Chana, Bas Rav Chaim, her neshama should have an aliyah. Today's topic seems to be out of line with our general theme of contemporary halacha, Hachadash, Assur min Hatorah, the response of the Chasam Sofer to reform. But as you'll soon see, this becomes a touch point, really, for many, many different debates in the contemporary realm. Many people align themselves either with the Chasam Sofer in how much we can accommodate, how much we have to hold the line. As we'll see, the Chasam Sofer was very strong. We have to toe the line, hold the line. We can't compromise. We can't accommodate. And many use sort of his paradigm when it comes to modern questions of innovation and accommodation to new questions. It has many, many ramifications beyond the particulars issue that the Chasam Sofer was dealing with. It enters many different realms, and you can draw your own conclusions. I'm not going to address all of them, but as you'll soon see, the Chasam Sofer is sort of the touch point for many of the modern questions that we have today. So I'm going to go through a few tshuvas of the Chasam Sofer, and then we'll see some of the context and what they were dealing with at the time, and then we'll deal also with, finally, a contemporary shaila that was asked to Rav Moshe Feinstein. So, in 1819 or 1820, the Chasam Sofer writes a tshuva to the Hamburg Bezdin about the Reformed Temple in Hamburg. Hamburg was the first place in Germany that built a Reformed Temple, and he wrote a tshuva to the Hamburg Bezdin addressing many of the different issues that were being basically the battleground, and the fault lines were being drawn, and Chasam Sofer was asked what his perspective was on this new innovation. And I titled the shiur Hachadash Assur min Hatorah, as we'll soon see, as the way people referred to the approach of the Chasam Sofer. He does use the term in a few tshuvas, but I think people soundbite him, people limit him to this one phrase, and it means really anything new is Assur. Hear that? Chadash Assur min Hatorah. But the music, but it doesn't, as you'll soon see, it doesn't really mean that. There's certain innovations that come from a certain place, and a certain lack of respect to tradition is really, what he was against, and we'll soon see how he responds. So, I don't think we're going to get through all of the different tshuvas, but let's start. This is the major tshuva, the major tshuva, which he deals with all the different topics, is in Shelos Utshuvos Chasam Sofer Chelek Vav in Likutim Simin Pei Dalet. So he says here that your honor, really, Hagiani, it really means your letter has reached me. And he says, Haleini many morim, that it has weakened me, shocked me, and made me bitter. In other words, it's been very painful to hear this. Kihu magid chadashos, that you told me about these new ideas that are coming. Kiyotzo anashim b'nei bli ol malchus shamayim, that there are people. You've informed me that there are people that do not respect the ol malchus shamayim, the yoke of heaven. Lahafer berisos, to annul the covenants. Benachli dasos chadashim mikarev bo. That they've gone and made new ideas for new religions that have risen of late. Va'achas, and one of them, their plan, va'achas dasam, one of their ideas, lihiyos based vilasam kol yemei hashavua segura umuskeretz, that one of their ideas is that the shul should be locked the rest of the week. Yom HaShabbos yiftach, and on Shabbos they should open up. No more regular davening, just once a week prayers on Shabbos. Umitin gamzeh vayizgor delasim. He says, like halavai, they should have it closed, basically. He's kind of making a little bit of a humorous point here that, like, or maybe he's not even being humorous. He's just saying, if you're going to go ahead and close it the rest of the week and only open on Shabbos, so close it the whole time anyways. It'll be better that you should close it then also. Now, I numbered some of these issues here, which he goes through back, not all in chronological order when he deals with them, but in the Shiloh, I sort of numbered them just for your own convenience. He says, number 2, Kishinu nusach hatfila hamukubeles mi'anshei knesset hagdola. They've changed the text of the prayer that they receive from the Anshe Knesset Hagdola, u'michachmei Talmudenu, and from the sages of our Talmud, u'ma'avosenu hakadoshim, and from our holy ancestors, our holy avos. V'hosifu, and they've added things. V'garu, and they've taken away. B'nuschos asher badu milibam, from text of their sidurim, of their from their own imaginations. V'haznicho kama brachos, and they've neglected or rejected many different brachos, birchas hashachar, hamuveres b'perek haroah, that come explicitly in the 9th parak of brachos. V'hashalo lahaskir, and he says he shouldn't even mention what they've done, that they've now taken away the shalol lahaskir tzmichos keren David mishichenu, that they've taken away any prayers for the flowering of the David Mashiachenu, our Mashiach of David, Ubinyan, and the Beis Hamikdash, V'kilkul, V'shekalul Tzion Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh, and they've and the idea of getting to and constructing a Tzion in Yerushalayim. That's so. Number 1, we said they're closed during the week, and number 2, they've changed the tefillos, taken away some of the tefillos. Number 3. Yamdu na'arim notzarim, or notzrim, v'yischaku lefneihem b'kinor v'ogev, and they've now appointed young Christians to play on the harp or the organ in the shul, b'mizmor halalu es Hashem min hashamayim, during the song of halalu es Hashem min hashamayim, b'yom Shabbos kodesh, asher Assur lanu, on the day of Shabbos, which would be prohibited from us. That's number 3. Number 4, V'rov tfilasim b'loshen Ashkenazi. They've changed dafka. They've changed their prayers to German specifically. I think that we talked about this a few weeks ago about davening in English or in other languages. Okay, and then I'm just skip a little bit ahead, but he says that he's addressing the people in Hamburg. Okay. Then he says that your letter has reached me, in the evening, and you're asking me if it's appropriate to, or how should we react, basically, to these these breaches of our tradition. So he says, Ma'ashiv, what can I say? How can I respond to you? Halo yadu mefursim ki Daniel ish chamudos tlas zemani biyoma have baruch al berchosai mitzali modi kodem eloka. That isn't it? It's well known that Daniel, in Sefer Daniel, he prayed 3 times a day. Even the story is he did it even at his own risk, but it shows us that even before there was a gzeira against praying. That was obviously his custom before the gzeira. And he says it goes back even before Daniel. It comes back that, he's talking about praying 3 times a day, not just on Shabbos. It goes back to Gemaras and the times of the Beis Hamikdash. He says that they would have these prayers 3 times a day. Or he doesn't say 3 times a day when it comes to the Beis Hamikdash, but he just says that over there it's clear that we understand it to be that they would daven every day. And then he says, even in the Beis Hamikdash Sheni, in the second temple, ve'ikrivu karbanos, they brought karbanos, and it's clear in Mesachos Tamid and Yuma, and also in Brachos, that the Kohanim, during their avoda, they would daven bispalo yudchas, they would daven the 18 brachos. So it goes back even to that time, and they would pray al tzmichas keren David HaMelech. and even during the times of the Chashmonaim. The Chashmonaim, they prayed for the restoration of the Davidic dynasty. And you see this from the Mishnah in Rabbi Hachadash, who codified the Mishnah, and in both of our Talmudim, the Yerushalmi and the Bavli. It's clear, it's very clear that we prayed more than just on Shabbos. So he says, V'timasi al elu hanashim. I'm shocked at those people shemispalim b'Shabbos kodesh based tefillos. All they do is they pray 2 times on Shabbos, tefillas harishona, kodem kriyas Hatorah. One is before laning, they daven once. V'hashniya acharei, after that, achareya, they do daven a second thing. V'nusach shebadu lahem, and they just make up their own nusach. He says, Asha alim, I would ask them, V'yodi'eni, they'll tell me, they'll have to inform me, Mativam shal beis tefillos b'yom echad. What is the reason that you're praying these 2 different tefillos? V'im yomru alo b'Shabbos hikrivu beis mini karbanos. They'll say, well, on Shabbos, didn't we bring 2 kinds of karbanos? We brought the tamid, and we brought the musaf. So therefore we daven 2 tefillos on Shabbos. So he says, well, I don't understand. Im kain, al karchu b'chol yom. Every day yispalu b'malkum tamid b'chol yom. What is the reason we pray every day? It's based on the carbon tamid. So you're saying, oh, well, on Shabbos we have 2 tefillos because of the 2 karbanos. Well, then why don't we pray the rest of the week based on the karbanos? Then I'll summarize his argument over here. He says, maybe you'll say that the reason why we should no longer be praying for the flowering of the redemption and for return to the land is because when do we daven for that? When do we pray for that? That's when. Well, first he makes a different argument before we get there. He makes it. He says basically that we don't have so many statements from Chazal. He says we had so many Rabbanim and they were incredible yeshivas, and we have very few statements of Chazal. But the statements that we do have, he says that we've been saying this tefillos for generations and generations, with no one are disagreeing with these things for thousands of years, and no one made much of an issue of it. So it was accepted. It came from the Chachamim. It came from these great individuals, and the Masorah and the Jewish people have been praying these prayers for thousands of years, and no one had an issue with it. And then he says, what I think is interesting, just to pause for a second, just to reflect on this. There are different kinds of responses throughout Jewish history. The reason why I'm using this one is because it's such a landmark tshuva for many reasons. But first of all, it was very influential. And it changed the face of the discussion in many, many ways. But more than that, the Chasam Sofer doesn't just say, it's new, it's wrong, close the discussion. He goes through painstakingly every single issue, and he shows through sources, through argument, logical argumentation, and he cites chapter and verse. This is why this is wrong. He doesn't just say, no, it's not our way. He explains, and therefore he's giving reasons behind his opposition. So that's why I think it was also his power of his knowledge and his charisma and the persona that he drew in Pressburg. But it was more than that. I think that the tshuva, you see, he's really going through every single issue and every single argument and making a very strong case against it. So he says, you're gonna change the nusach tefillah. This comes from Chazal. We have very few statements from Chazal, thinking of the thousands of years in which they function, but we do have these brachos, and you're going to change those. I was just looking at something recently. I saw Rabbi Moshe Taub. Where did I see this? In his book, Ezra gave me Rabbi Moshe Taub's new book as a gift. So thank you, Ezra. In the book, he says that he used to work very often with the conservative and reform rabbis in Buffalo, because it was a very small community. He had to work alongside them. And in the book, he said that he was asked to, I guess, give his opinion on a certain textbook of what should be appropriate for the school or something. And there was a certain line in a Shakespeare play that he felt was not appropriate for the girls to read or something. So they put it in they took it out and put brackets to show that it was taken out. So that it was on his desk when he was meeting with one of these conservative local rabbis, and he made some comment. He's like, the words of Shakespeare, I don't know anyone could sanction such a book that takes the words out of Shakespeare and doesn't leave them in their pristine, original. So Rabbi Tzab says, I'm not sure if I responded too harshly to him, but I said, in 19th century or 18th century English writer, you have an issue with taking out his words, but the prayers that have been said for 2,000 years by the Jewish people, you have no problem taking things out. It's like, whatever. So I just brought that idea to mind. I just saw that last night. I'm seeing that it's taking a long time to get through a lot of this, so I'm just going to try to summarize some of his arguments here. So he says, well, maybe you'll say, well, you're going to make a bezdin, and you're going to, there's a legal concept in halacha that you can go ahead and, create a new law with a new bezdin, and you can uproot some of the laws that were previously established. He says, if that would be the case, you would have to have a bezdin that was greater in wisdom and in number. That's the halacha. And you don't have that. You don't have any way to do that. And even if you were to get through that problem, he says, when it comes to tefillos, so the tefillos were accepted in all areas of the community. You'll say, well, there's Nusach Sfar, there's Nusach Ashkenaz, how could that be? Well, he says, well, everywhere where it was established, it was not debated. In each community, it may be different, but in each place that it was established, it was done without any dissent. Then he goes back to the point that I was mentioning before. He says, if you're going to say, I'm not sure what page, but it's Im Yomar HaOmer Sha'akopanim Hispal Al Tzmichas David Karen David. He says, you're going to say, page 4, you're going to say that, my notes are a little bit different. He says, if you are going to say, well, when did we daven for the restoration of the Davidic dynasty and to return to our land and all that? That's when we were in difficult scenarios where we didn't have our own sovereignty, when we couldn't eat the fruit of and be sated by the goodness of the land, and now we're wishing we can go back there. But now that we live in such a wonderful country with so much support from the government and we're protected, we don't need to pray for that any longer. Maybe that's what your argument is going to be. So first of all, you could have argued and said, we're not living in such great times where the Jews were persecuted. He doesn't go that route, probably for obvious reasons that his writings were going to be seen by the government and other things. The Hungarian government looked through many of the different writings, but he said, let's just assume that is the reality on the ground, that we're now living in great times, and therefore we don't need to daven and pray to return to our back to our land. He says, no, that doesn't make any sense. He says, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, as I mentioned before, they davened for the restoration of the Davidic dynasty, even when they had some sovereignty and control, because they didn't have the full glory of the Shekhinah, of the Beis Hamikdash in its full form. So they davened during that time as well, and he's mentioned in the times of the Chashmonaim, etc. And then he says, well, maybe they're going to say it's an insult to the government. It's an insult to the non-Jewish government, because you're going to be charged with a dual loyalty. You live in Hungary, and you're supposed to be a loyal citizen of Hungary, and you're praying that you should leave here and go to Jerusalem. Maybe you have dual loyalty. You're not a real citizen. So he says, well, Nehemiah, who was the Mishnah Lamelech, he was second to the king. He still prayed for to return back to Jerusalem, and he prayed for these tefillas, and it didn't seem to bother the king at that time. That doesn't seem to be an issue. And he says, even there, well, the non-Jews also pray for the restoration. He doesn't use the actual the name of it, but he says. He says the Christians also pray. I I don't see where he's. 1 second. He says, Gam heim miachalim linchol ir kvaros mishicham. They also hope for and pray for to inherit the city of their Messiah's grave. That is a reference to the bringing back Yeshu. In other words, they understand this idea that we all want this messianic era. No one's going to be insulted by that. He says, I think you're the one who's insulting them. Because what are you doing? Ani omer kihim hamachnifim la'amei aratzos. The ones who are doing this new reform. What are they doing? Because they're trying to say, they're saying, Lamor kamoni kamochem. We're like you. But no, heim amatilim kotzim be'eneim. But these people claiming that we're just like you, they're sticking thorns in the eyes of the non-Jews. Why? Mashalochim notzi l'shorer bebeis tfilasim l'nagim klishir argel. Because they're hiring these non-Jews to play the organs in the synagogue. Hayitachen she'ish notzri. Is it possible that a Christian person, Moshel Eretz, that he's a ruler of land, he's a noble individual, and he's going to be an Eved Minagim Bebeis Tfilasim Shal Yisrael. Imagine the person is a Christian person, he is in another religion's temple and playing for you. That's insulting to him because he's not, he's assisting in something that he doesn't even believe in. That would be, in his eyes, insulting to him. And he says, that's like, avodas Shimshon hashavui etzel ha'plishtim. It's like what they did to Shimshon. When the Plishtim took Shimshon into captivity, they made him play in their avodah zara, shrines.
They would go as far as to hire a Jew to do it? Is that like
on Shabbos? On Shabbos.
Amir Lakov, they really didn't bother with.
They didn't care. Right. No, they. I don't think they would go that far, but they're closed during the week, so there's no other option, right? But you're saying why wouldn't they just play straight up? So it was just, it changed over time. They didn't right away do away with the Jew themselves. Yeah, it was a slippery slope. He says, you're the ones who are making the guy insulting him. You're mocking him. That's what they did to Shimshon when they wanted to mock him. Then he says, okay, so, and then he says, well, maybe you'll say that it's not such an issue of mocking, but he says, from us, mitzidenu lo yitachim, we shouldn't allow this either. Why? Kevin shanara notzu, this non-Jewish Christian kid, eino me'amunosenu. How could this kid contribute to our tefillos, going up to Hashem? He doesn't even believe in this. He doesn't believe in what we're saying. So that doesn't make any sense. It's like he quotes a pasuk from Mishlei. It's like a shar b'shirim al levra. It's like you're davening with like an evil heart. He doesn't believe in any of this stuff. And if you'll say, well, it's a maisakov ba'alma, it's like you make like a monkey. He doesn't really know what he's doing anyways. Again, that's going to place enmity between us and the nations. So either way you slice it, he says this is not a viable option. It doesn't even make sense, and he points out that we have an issue with making music in Gullus anyways because music is problematic. Okay. Can you continue? He goes through a lot of different points here, and then he says v'mashe maftir benavi. They skipped the Haftorah. I'm not sure if they were going to Kiddush Club, but they he says you're not reading the Haftorah. It's a Mefursha Gemara. It's a Mishnah that you have to read from the Haftorah. It's a Mishnah in Megillah, and no one's allowed to. No Beis Din can come along and say, "Oh, we're not going to follow the Mishnah." It's a Mefursha Mishnah. You can't disagree with that. Okay, we've dealt with davening in other languages, but just briefly, he points out that people have suggested we should use other languages to help the rank and file of people who don't understand Hebrew. He says they should learn Hebrew. You should learn Hebrew. This is the question that we discussed last time. How far are you going to accommodate and water down, and then people won't be aspired to anything. So you should learn Hebrew, he says, just like a king, when you go to a king, you speak his language. If you go to a foreign country, you try. Maybe nowadays it's a little bit different because there's translators and whatever, but they try to say some phrase in the other person's language. It's just considered respectful. So he says Hashem's language, he speaks to the prophets in his Lashon Kodesh. Hashem, he created the world with Lashon Kodesh. And therefore it is appropriate that we should use Lashon Kodesh. So, just to summarize, they should daven 3 times a day. The Chasam Sofer says you can't skip Hatorah. You can't hire a non-Jew to play in your synagogue because, first of all, Mir L'Nachri. Second of all, it's offensive. You're going to say it's offensive for us to daven for the Messiah. It's not everyone davens for the Messiah, but this is offensive because you're saying that he should play for a faith that he doesn't believe in. And if anything, he's going to think, well, how does this help them if I'm helping their prayers? Oh, they just think I'm some sort of monkey or some tool. They're making, okay, so it's a job. People will make a buck. But, there's certain implications that go along with just having these people doing these things. And the Chasam Sofer says, oh, you'll say that things are great now in Hamburg. We don't need to pray for the restoration of David, of a Messiah, of Beis HaMikdash, because that was only when we were really in bad shape. He says, no, we prayed for that even when we had the Chashbonoim, when we had the Bayis Sheni, we still prayed for the full restoration. And he says, musical instruments are a problem, as we mentioned before. Okay. He says, you're going to say this is a shvus b'makam mitzvah. You're doing a mir l'nachri in a case where it's a mitzvah. He says this is a shvus b'makam she'ein mitzvah. There's no mitzvah over here that you're doing. So that's in short the Chasam Sofer's first tshuva. He doesn't invoke Hachadash, Assur, and Hatorah in this tshuva at all. But in the next tshuva I want to see together, which is about 10 years later, he does. So the phrase Hachadash, Assur, and Hatorah comes from a Mishnah in Orla. The Mishnah in Orla is discussing a suffix Orla, and it's talking about other kinds of produce that would be prohibited. And it has a line here, Hachadash. Hachadash is the new grain. Assur min haTorah b'chol makom. It is forbidden in all places, in all situations. Now this is talking about if basically there's a new crop of grain which is forbidden until the second day of Pesach where they bring the carbon ha'omer. So he takes that out of context. The Chasam Sofer was asked a question which he's going to use this phrase in response to, but people forget he made other arguments, not just this one argument that he sort of repurposes this phrase. He makes other arguments as well. And the question was, he was asked, I'll just summarize it because the hour is late. He was asked, there's a shul that was renovating, and they wanted to know that there are those that want to put the bima in the front of the shul. Now, this doesn't seem to be such a hot button issue today, but in those days, it was a battleground. Why was it a battleground? Because the Christians had seemingly, I'm not an expert in 18th and 19th century Christian temples, but apparently the structure of the room was that everything that was happening was out in the front of the church, and they wanted to move the bima where they would read the Torah from was traditionally in the middle. They wanted to move that up to the front. And that's what they were doing in many different Reform synagogues. So the Chasam Sofer was asked, now that we're making it more beautiful and more spacious, can we put the bima in the front? So he was asked this tshuva. So he says, absolutely not. Absolutely not. He says, well, you're going to quote me a Rambam. Now here, everything else beforehand, there wasn't really much of an argument. It seems to be there was an open and shut case. But here, there is a Rambam where the Rambam says, seemingly, he quotes a Ketz of Mishnah. I couldn't find this Ketz of Mishnah, but he quotes a Ketz of Mishnah who's a comment, Rav Yosef Karo, a comment on the Rambam. And the Rambam says, you put the bima in the middle. And the Ketz of Mishnah says, the reason why you do that is so that it's more audible to everybody. So if it's more audible to everybody, that's why it would be in the middle. That's what the Ketz of Mishnah says. So the questioner is saying that it seems to be that it was just a practical consideration. In other words, there was no fundamental reason behind it. The only reason was a practical reason. But if that's the whole reason, then there would be no problem. Seemingly, if you want it to be in the front, and let's say it's a little bit more spread out, and people wanted to be there. Why would there be any? What would be the problem? So how is the Chasam Sofer going to address this? These are real source. This is the Chasam Mishnah, Yosef Karo, the author of Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam. How's he going to get over this? So here he flips everything on its head, and he says respectfully, but it's disagreeing with this Kesef Mishnah, which is why I looked it up and I couldn't find it. I wanted to see what he says, but he says this Kesef Mishnah. He says whatever. He didn't identify properly the source of this whole halacha, because the source of the halacha he wants to argue is a Gemara in Sukkah Taf Nun Aleph about the Beis HaKnesses in Alexandria. Alexandria apparently had a massive Beis HaKnesses. It was so large that they had to wave flags in order to tell people what they were up to, if they should say Amen and such. Not because there was so much talking, because that we don't know. But apparently it was so large that they had to put up these flags. And in Alexandria, they had the bima in the middle. So that was the source for it being in the middle. So he says, it was good that the Rav, the Kesef Mishnah, was trying to give a limud zchus on these kihilos that were going against what it says in Shas. Why was it against what it says in Shas? It says, Lo ra'ah ha'kesev mishnah makom minalon la'poskim shetamud habim be'emtza beis ha'knesses v'ushas oruch. It's an explicit mesechtish sukkah. Be'anche Alexandria v'yafa kasev arab kesev mishnah lolomud zchus al iza kilos hanogim neged hashas. Oh, in other words, he's not saying that Alexandria was against Shas. He's saying it's a nice thing where the Kesef Mishnah is trying to give a limud zchus to other kehilos who put the bima up in the front, which would be against what the Gemara says. Avol nirali shenishtabshu hakehilos. They made a mistake. He says they must have made a mistake. Why? Because he says the opposite is the case. What do you see from the case of Alexandria? He says there they weren't able to hear so well anyways. So seemingly the issue of putting it in the middle has nothing to do with the ability to hear it, because in Alexandria they couldn't hear anyways, and yet they still put it in the middle, which shows you that there was some sort of significance to it being in the middle. That's number one. Number two, he says it's logical that the bima should be in the middle because the Beis HaKnesses, this is a chiddush. By the way, the Chasam Sofer was not against chidushim. He makes a chiddush in the context of his tshuva against Hachadash Assur min Hatorah. But his chiddush is, I saw that I think Rabbi Yehuda Turetsky points that out. The chiddush is that the Beis HaMikdash is the model for the Beis HaKnesses. Now that sounds like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, but you have to point out that not only is it like a Mikdash Ma'at, a small miniature version, but everything has to fit into the same paradigm. So he wants to say the Aron was in the front, and the Mizbeach is like the Bima, and the Mizbeach was in the middle, and therefore it was between the menorah and the shulchan, and the Mizbeach is the Aron, is the Bima, and therefore it has to be in the middle. That's point number two. Point number three is, he says, if you're going to move it, it's going to be motzi laz. It's going to, people are going to now question what was done up until now. So anytime you do make a change, if it wasn't done before like that, so you're going to make it seem like, oh, was that a problem? You've been doing this for 1,000 years and now you're going to change it. It brings up questions about the previous practice. Point number four is he says, that he thinks the opposite is the case. Nowadays, he's saying we have more people come into shul. Maybe is your argument. Maybe you could argue this. So you should put it in the front to make more room or whatever. He says the opposite is the case. If you have more people, so even he doesn't even think this is really a good argument. But your argument is people only had the bima in the middle, so you could hear better. He says, well, okay. So if you have a lot of people coming to shul, so you should put it in the middle so they'll be able to hear. Like he's like he's sort of like pulling the rug from out underneath their feet and showing them that they're basically internally contradicting, but he's trying to point out that it's because they want to model. He doesn't say it explicitly, but they're trying to model it after the Christians. He says, your argument was it was only a practical consideration to put it in the middle so we can move it. He says, but the practical consideration is still there. Okay, if you're, so put it in the middle. So, and then finally, the fifth point is v'haklal hachadash Assur min Hatorah b'chol makom. Anything that is a new innovation is forbidden under all circumstances. So people forget all the other arguments. They just think, oh, it's new, it's wrong. That's not what the Chasam Sofer is, and that's probably not why it was so influential. It's because he makes the points that he makes clearly, and he shows chapter and verse why they're wrong. Okay. It's getting late. I want to show you one thing that I thought was very interesting of a tshuva that he wrote. It was not published in his own works, but it was published in a work called Darkei Hora by Rav Tzvi Hirsch Chios or Chayos. The Maretz Chias. The Maretz Chias was more. It's interesting. You can see there's a little picture of the work. It has flowers on it. Darkei Hora, published in 1842, and it's a correspondence between himself, Tzvi Hirsch Chias, and the Chasam Sofer. Rav Tzvi Hirsch Chias, it's a very interesting. He's a very interesting figure because there's an actual dissertation written by Rav Hutner's daughter. Bruria Hutner David, Rebbetzin David, who founded BJJ. So in 1973, she went to Columbia and did a PhD on this person, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Chias, and if I'm not mistaken, the title of her dissertation is Traditionalist and Maskil. Now we think of the word maskil as, they're a reformer. It's not necessarily the case. There were people who maybe we would say they were moderate, or we would say they were enlightened, but she makes the argument that he was more accommodating, he was more understanding of new innovations. So he has this back and forth between himself and the Chasam Sofer. It's actually 4 different letters. We're not going to read all of them, but there's one famous line or a few lines in this tshuva that he writes to Rav Tzvi Hirsch Chias. This is the Chasam Sofer, where he's not going to have any of this accommodations. The topic not for now, but it's a long discussion between actually Moses Mendelssohn and Rav Yaakov Emden. But the issue that they had at that time was leaving the body unburied for 3 days. Apparently, there was a law that was passed based on medical advice that you have to wait 3 days. People are being buried alive. I don't know if we have medical records of that time, but they wanted to leave people unburied for 3 days to make sure no one's being buried who wasn't dead. So that was a big issue. Moses Mendelssohn, that was his first major break with the traditional community, and Tzvi Hirsch Chias is arguing to the Chasam Sofer. Maybe you could basically argue that it's okay, or maybe it's more. We should be more understanding of it. And the Chasam Sofer says, no, absolutely not. He says you are arguing that there's. I'm just summarizing what he says, that there's this. There's basically the Chavos Yair. The Chavos Yair wants to argue that Halonas Ames, not burying, or Baal Talin, of leaving somebody out, is a Dirabanan. He says that no. He says I'm going to tell you. I'm skipping ahead. Sorry. He says first of all I want to tell you. He uses a lot of honorifics for him, and he definitely respects Rav Tzvi Hirsch Chias. But he says. Hine lo kasafti orla. This is in source number 6. I didn't just quote from this Mishnah in Orla, Hachadash Assur min Hatorah, for no reason. He says, I didn't just write Orla and Kilayim upigol lo yiratzeh. I used Chadash. Because, why did I use the term Chadash? Because, Ki mizikenim esponein. I looked at the elders, the previous generations, and I saw Shiraylios Mamikim Hatorah. It's not such a great print over here, so I can't really see that word. Matmitike Hatorah. They were the ones who supported the Torah. V'nizharu mulevtoach Pesach ulechapes kulos. They were very hesitant to open up the door to kulos ulapritzi amenu, and for the people who are breaching the walls, who are acting licentiously of our nation. Assur osan asher asher. Osa Hemavakshim. They didn't want to give them the kulos that they wanted. He says, V'im yimtso sadak kimachat. If they opened up a little hair's breadth of a hole, shall sitkis upirtsu parrots up in a parrot. They're going to open up, if you open up a little hole, they're going to just open up it's like you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And he says, I told you that leaving a mace not buried is an Assur, it's two Isurim Daraisa. And I based myself off of a Ramban, and he says, because sometimes, he says, even though there's no nafkamina, at the end of the day, who cares? It's the Rabbana and it's the Daraisa, it's two Daraisas, Aseh and Los Aseh. He says, why does it make a difference? It doesn't really matter. In nafkus ladina, bisman azeh ladina, tov lahalos ha'isr. Sometimes it's important to emphasize, to pump up the isr. He says, even though, yes, you have that chavos yair, ein megalin. Ein megalin. Don't tell people, ein megalin adavar. Don't tell people about that chavos yair, because you have to emphasize, you have to hold the line here, and say no. And he says, well, you're going to tell me that no to be Yehuda, the famous Rav Yecheskel Landau, who was a gadol of Yisrael before the Chasam Sofer, he matired non-Jews writing on Shabbos in a business for the Jew, and he says, because it's a double derabanan, etc., they're not writing in Ksav Ashuris, but he says, that was a mistake. He says, that was a mistake. When the Nodes of Yehuda accommodated that, he says people are just going to say, oh, it's derabanan. They don't really care. Maybe we'll say, okay, the revelation at Sinai, fine. Well, the rabbis, who cares? What rabbis? I don't care about what the rabbis say. And he says, that's a mistake. So that's why sometimes you have to emphasize that it's Assur, even when there is a Das Yachid that was rejected. He says, don't tell people about that. So what do you see from here? You see from here that his perspective on halacha is very much attuned to public policy. And he has an understanding of where this is going to go. And what do they want from this whole thing? Oh, they want to leave the bodies out. It's not because they're actually interested in the halacha. It's because there's new accommodations being made because they want either, like in his case of the bima, they want to mirror the Christians, or as he mentioned, the whole idea of davening only once a week. You see, his perspective is. Yes, he comes from a halachic perspective, but it's also understanding the effects and the after effects on the community based on these changes. I'll just show you one last source, and we'll finish with that. Sometimes these battles are not relevant anymore, right? The battle on over the bima battle, it's not really a hot issue anymore, and therefore sometimes it's important to understand the context where this was. Sometimes the context is relevant, sometimes the context is not relevant. So Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked a shaila a few centuries later, obviously, about going into a shul or moving the bima to the front of the shul. Are you allowed to do this? This is actually, I'm looking at the year, Tavshin Tes. So it's 5/7/19. That would be 70 years ago, about, right? So he says, he was asked from a rabbi in Kansas, Rabbi Nachman Meir Bernard, Rav Be'er, Wichita, Kansas. Wichita, Kansas. He was zocheh to be in the Igros Moshe for all of time. And he asked him, can we build the bima in the front? So he says, I don't think it's such an issue. He says, I've heard people say, Masha Omrim Sheba Hungary, Sheba Ungarian, in Hungary, Assur. He says they say Assur, they made it Assur. Lo Yadua Zeh Bebira. I don't know for sure that they Assured it. In other words, yes, the Chasam Sofer said it was Assur, but did they really come out with a formal Isser? He says, and Umistaber Shahayazer Rak Bimkomot Haim Sha'asuza Bishvil Reformam. It would be logical that even if there was for sure an Isser, which he's not 100% clear on, that was only because they were doing it specifically as a reform. And that was because they were trying to do a reform. But in other places, reform, you want to make more space in the shul or whatever architectural structure you need, that's okay. And then he says, people say that not only are you not allowed to build it, maybe you're not even allowed to go daven in a shul that has it built with the beam in the front. He says, no, that's not a problem. He says, Mikol Mokum L'charchila. He mentions the Chasam Sofer and says, L'charchila. Maybe we should try to accommodate the architecture to conform to what the Chasam Sofer wrote. Yes, that's a good thing. It's a good thing to do, but it's a chumrah. He says, Yeshvade lachush dvarav. Certainly we should try to accommodate what the Chasam Sofer wrote. However, Assur lehespalel, but to say you can't daven in such a place, gam l'taimei ein shum makom. There's no reason for that. Ve'im ha'emes keshamua sha'asu be'ez makomos. Maybe you'll tell me there really was a full-out chayrim or some sort of Assur that was put into place in certain places. Hayuzerak hora shah b'midinasam. That was only a temporary for prohibition. B'shvil ha-reform. So he says it was a temporary measure, and therefore there's no problem of davening in such a shul. So what I wanted to just show you that is number one, the Chasam Sofer's landmark tshuva, citing chapter and verse. Also understanding that there are policies, halachic policy is something that really comes out of this era in the Chasam Sofer, and drawing the line and saying this is coming from a bad place, and don't just look for a kula because it's on the books. You're right, there could be on the books kula, but you have to know where is this headed. Be a chacham. Don't just say, well, it's mutter. Is this smart to do? Does this make sense? Where are they coming from? Are these people who are on the right path? Yes, it comes up a lot with accommodating people with new questions, new issues. Everyone, I'm not saying we can never make exceptions and all. You have to be a chacham, you have to know. But if a person sees this tshuva and understands what the battlegrounds were, you understand why we're so sensitive about certain issues, but also you understand when it's not relevant. And Moshe says, the battle is not a battle anymore. We won this battle. Like everyone has an art scroll sitter, right? It's not like, an issue, but with davening in other languages, again, we spoke about that in the past. There's what to aspire towards, but I thought it just an important perspective to share with you, as it is sort of a flashpoint or a sort of I would say, what's the word? It's a litmus test for many where they fall on this issue of the Chasam Sofer. Do we hold the line? Do we just do it because this is our minhag and we can't shift? Or maybe we're a little bit more open to accommodating when people are coming from the right place. That is still today an issue. Thank you so much for coming, and it should be a zchus for Meir's mother.